Hi, everyone. Welcome to Advent Member Talks, Advent Co-working's weekly event featuring a different Advent member on the topic of their choosing. My name is Sam. My pronouns are they, them, and I'm the Director of Member Experience here at Advent Co-working. We are a creative co-working community, art gallery, event space, podcast studio, yoga studio, so many things, right? But most importantly, we are a community and we love putting on this event. It gives us the opportunity to promote all of our amazing members, as well as give members the chance to share all their skills and just incredible knowledge, not only with the community, but with the greater Charlotte entrepreneurial community as well. So today I'm joined by Cameron, and Cameron's going to be talking about the non-discrimination discrimination, that is a word, ordinances and information that's currently happening in Mecklenburg County and across the state. So I'm going to hand it over to Cameron, and per usual, if you have any questions, go ahead, type those in the comments, and we'll have a short Q&A at the end. Cameron.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Sam. My name is Cameron Pruette. I am the president currently of the LGBTQ Democrats in Mecklenburg County. I use he, him pronouns. And so if you live in Charlotte or have for more than 2 or 3 years, this idea of non-discrimination protections is probably nothing new. Back in 2016, there was a whole push for this, and then the legislature came back with some kickback from that called HB2 basically took away the rights of local cities and towns and counties to be able to pass non-discrimination protections. I think it's important to start off with that there is no state or federal law that protects people on the basis of sexual orientation or gender identity. If you get married today and you take your honeymoon to Wilmington, that hotel that you booked for your honeymoon can deny you rights to stay at that hotel because of who you are or what you look like or who you love. So that this is a real issue that affects people. I think it's important for us to point out that the most impacted people in our community continue to be trans, especially Black trans women and trans women of color, who face disproportionately high levels of violence, unemployment, and homelessness. And so when we're talking about these sorts of protections, it's not just whether or not I can go marry my partner and be okay the next day. This is much more about people having access to jobs and housing and services. And so what we're talking about is that in Charlotte and Mecklenburg County and a lot of the townships are looking at non-discrimination protections that would give someone equal access, just equal access, right? We're equal access to a job, to housing, to services, to healthcare, and making sure that those are protected. So the reason this is happening now is that December 1st of last year, the compromise from HB2, which was HB 142, HB is just House bill, so all these, but HB 142 expired, which means that localities can pass their own non-discrimination protections. Now, what this does not affect and what the State General Assembly still has control over are bathrooms. Now, it is absolutely insane and unfair to characterize any of these protections as bathroom bills and really use a scare tactic to put an already marginalized group of people, trans people, non-binary people, as an enemy, as someone who is threatening someone else, which is vile. And so these are not bathroom bills. These are really about equal access and making sure that people have the right to live their lives and not face discrimination based on their gender identity or expression or their sexual orientation. The other really interesting thing that's happening with this most recent push is that this has never been about just protecting one group of people. Even in conversations I've been able to have with county commissioners and city council members is we want a broad protections, not just for LGBTQ plus people, but other aspects of our communities, right? And so one of the things that's happened very recently is the United States House last year passed something called the Crown Act, which protects on natural hair discrimination. So there are plenty of places that say you have to have professional hair, and what professional hair often means is white appearing hair. And so people whose hair is not professional have difficulty finding jobs or getting an interview. And so one of the things that we're looking at as well is that natural hair discrimination protections as well. If you work, I know many of you are entrepreneurs and may run smaller businesses. Equal employment opportunity protections don't apply to you, right? So if you are discriminated against for a variety of reasons and you have fewer than 15 employees, there are no protections in place for people at all. And so talking about bridging those gaps as well. And so we're not just asking for sexual orientation and gender identity protections, though that's obviously a key ask we have, but also what are other areas of our community that need protection? Some localities in North Carolina have also been looking at certain migrant communities that may need additional protections to get equal access. So it's kind of an exciting time to look at these. A lot of people are like, didn't we already do this? A lot of people may think we don't already have these protections, and we don't, right? Same-sex people can marry, and then if they work for a small business, they can be fired for that the next day, or they could be denied buying their first home together because they're gay or because their gender identity isn't what it should be according to whoever's selling them the home. So these are still real issues that sometimes we just want to say, well, we've already done that. And which I get, there's a lot of fatigue, right? After 2016, there are a lot of people who were even in the LGBTQ community who pushed really hard for these protections and are now a little fatigued out themselves from that. And so there's a lot going on. So in Mecklenburg County, earlier in February, passed a resolution, which isn't binding by law, but sort of a symbolic aspiration. And they unanimously passed a resolution calling for LGBTQ plus protections throughout Mecklenburg County and the townships and in Charlotte. And then they also did this follow-up move of asking the county attorney what enforcement powers they would have. Obviously, if we've looked at the tent city abatement, we can see that the city and county like to point fingers and figure out who should be doing what. So there's overlapping authority and responsibility and who wants to do it. So right now, for Charlotte City and Mecklenburg County, there's conversations going around the Community Relations Committee, the CRC, and the CRC already does a lot around housing. So enforcing fair housing standards, public access to housing, and accommodations. So they already do some of this space, especially for things like race and male-female sex discrimination, cisgender lens currently, and so things like that. And so there's a lot of conversation around the CRC already does this for the county and the city. And so what might that look like expanding it under the CRC's umbrella? And the CRC has been very supportive in conversations and is continuing to look at this as well. And then townships as well, right? So Davidson, Matthews, Pineville have all been in conversations about how they might do this. Davidson actually now has an equity board that they just started in January that was looking at housing, but also might expand this to be part of obviously what an equity board might be working towards. There are lots of places in North Carolina that have already done this, Orange County being the big one. Durham has also already passed non-discrimination protections, where Asheville and Buncombe County are very soon down the road happening. There's even talk of Hendersonville looking at non-discrimination protections in some smaller towns throughout the state. This is very popular, right? People across the political spectrum, this is not just a Democrat-Republican issue. The last time they did a poll of North Carolina, like 68% of North Carolinians, not just people in Mecklenburg and Charlotte, but North Carolinians support this. And there is a backdrop, right, of the Equality Act just passed the United States House again last week, but it's not going to pass the Senate, right? And our current North Carolina General Assembly doesn't seem to be taking any action to move towards these protections either, which is also why we're coming to the local level, where, yes, ideally there would be a broad federal structure in place that protects everybody, and it wouldn't be controversial to make sure that we're protecting everyone in our communities. But until then, we're trying to push for it here on a local level. Yeah. Sorry, that was a big info dump.
See, it is. No, that's like a lot of information for folks. Would you mind giving just a quick overview for anyone who doesn't really know much about HB2 and just kind of the history of where we're coming from with that?
Sure, absolutely. So Charlotte, back in 2016, was going to take the step. Charlotte is the biggest city in the state. So when Charlotte does something, it impacts a lot of what happens elsewhere. And so HB2 was a response to the fact that Charlotte passed LGBTQ plus inclusive protections. HB2 zoned in on one specific aspect of those protections, which I mentioned before, was access to restrooms, that you should go to the restroom you feel most comfortable using. And so HB2 was a kickback against that. So HB2 basically said you cannot pass your own non-discrimination protections at the local level. It also put into place like making sure you couldn't raise your local minimum wage, and took a lot of powers away from the localities. In North Carolina, the General Assembly has the right to do that. There's actually crazy legal doctrine that says if the General Assembly hasn't told you you can do it, you cannot do it, right? It's got to be specifically given to you. HB2, even back in 2016, was incredibly unpopular. We lost a lot of economic revenue for it. A lot of national organizations, sports organizations, major companies decided to pull out of Charlotte or cancel tournaments in Charlotte and in North Carolina. Other states said they would not do business travel to North Carolina because this was a backwards regressive bill that encouraged discrimination specifically against transgender people in our community. And so after all that, the Republican governor who signed it into law lost re-election. The Republicans in the North Carolina General Assembly lost seats. And so HB 142 was this compromise, which wasn't great, but pulled back the most regressive parts of HB2, but still held into place that localities could not make their own rules. And so that was sort of the compromise out of all that. And again, that expired in December 1st of last year.
Thank you. So yeah, so everyone watching right now, if you have any questions for Cameron on what's going on politically with these non-discrimination ordinances, go ahead, drop those into the comments. I know we have a little bit of delay between the live viewing and where we are right now, so we can give folks a moment to go ahead and drop in those questions. But yeah, I remember I momentarily lived out of the state in like 2015, 2016. And so I remember watching kind of on the news, like everything happening with HB2 and just being like, oh my God, I need to like move back to Charlotte and like, just be a part of that movement to, to fight for that. So it's interesting to see this come back around. And I feel like I haven't seen as much organizing on the ground this go around. Have you?
So yeah, so it's been very interesting. So first of all, I will say, and I can drop this on the video too, but if you want to contact Charlotte City Council or Mecklenburg County Commission to voice your support and just continue to give momentum moving forward, cltisready.org and mechisready.org are both ways that you can communicate to county commission and city council just to continue to talk about your support for that. But yeah, you're right. There was an initial push because Republicans still control the General Assembly. The same people who passed HB2 and HB 142 are the same Speaker of the House and President of the Senate. Those are the same people, so they're still there. So there was an initial strategy, I think, to go to places Hillsborough, Orange County, who had done it in the past, Durham, and see what the General Assembly response was. And so there was a little bit of maneuvering, especially last year. Equality North Carolina, Campaign for Southern Equality have done a lot of work behind the scenes over 2020, seeing which towns might be interested to see what that initial push would look like. Non-discrimination protections have been passed in 8 localities now throughout the state, and the General Assembly has not said a word. Phil Berger, who is again one of the big proponents for HB2, has even said everyone should feel comfortable to live and work in North Carolina, which is so the political appetite doesn't seem to be there. But I think that was part of what you saw, sort of this delay in organizing, because they wanted to see what the response was going to be. And also probably why Charlotte has probably gone just a little bit slower than it did last time, because Charlotte has other priorities it wants from the General Assembly as well. So
Absolutely. And what you said too about folks like kind of burning out after 2016, I mean, that was a huge year between HB2 and Charlotte Uprising. So much activism was happening on the ground. And now a lot of energy is being put, rightfully so, towards supporting folks who have been living in tent city and just watching the city's just awfulness at supporting people and housing folks. So that makes sense. So I've been DM'd a few questions here.
Awesome.
So how would you respond to someone who says the government should not have a say in how a private business conducts itself?
Sure, absolutely, right. I think this is one of the questions that always comes up. Currently, the government does have a lot of say in how a private business runs. So the non-discrimination protections we look to expand already exist when it comes to race, when it comes to a variety, pregnancy status, veteran status. And ideally, yes, our society and culture would be at a place where we wouldn't need these sorts of things, but we know systemically that even sometimes these protections work best as a preventive measure, right? That it brings that lens to businesses. So, I think the main thing is that, we are already doing this in this space. So this isn't a new burden on business versus what's already there. And that there is a balance. The good thing about the CRC too, the Community Relations Committee, is that they actually have a full complaint process. So it's not, you did this, we go to court now. There's actually a whole reconciliation process. So the goal here isn't to find a business out, find someone till they have to go out of business or to force some unburden some legal fees, but to create this reconciliation process to where we fix the issue and prevent it really in the future.
Gotcha. So if someone feels like they've been, or if someone is discriminated against due to, their sexuality or gender identity, right now they couldn't go to the CRC.
Correct.
Is that correct? Okay. What should someone do if they experience that discrimination?
Right, absolutely. So it depends on, what realm you're talking about, right? But the main thing right now would be, it's a civil lawsuit, really is your only recourse, especially if you've been denied access to housing. Your real recourse, you don't have one, right? The Biden administration, and when it comes to housing, for example, has started looking at how they can put in federal housing protections for sexual orientation and gender identity. And then the Bostock ruling last year for the Supreme Court does add sexual orientation and gender identity to the Civil Rights Act. But both of those are still kind of in implementation phases. So you could try to go to the EEOC if your corporation you feel has been denied you, which again is also another reconciliation process, right? The EEOC, once you apply, it takes almost 90 days. They have a whole reconciliation process. And then, at the end of that, you may get a letter of right to sue, right? But again, these mechanisms try to bring reconciliation first.
Gotcha. And if you did go through with a civil lawsuit, are there organizations that support folks who want to do that, like Equality North Carolina, ACLU?
Right. So Campaign for Southern Equality and the ACLU are probably the best ones. Equality North Carolina will definitely connect you, network you to the right people. I would just say Campaign for Southern Equality definitely has a lot of experience in that space.
Awesome. So in regards, another question we have is, what happens if the state or local ordinances differ from federal laws?
Yeah, so usually, I mean, you go with the one that has the most level of protections, right? And so, number one, I think it's important to say that, there are things that are going to be true always true. So like the federal law, the federal constitution, the rights guaranteed to everybody will apply always. So there's nothing that a local ordinance can do that can take away someone's First Amendment rights to free speech. There's no local ordinance that can force a church to hire someone for any variety of reasons. So there's not overriding religious protections in any of these ordinances either. But you're right that we live in a very odd country, state, county, where there are these weird overlapping levels. So the reason that another good thing about having a local thing like the Community Relations Committee is that it's local, it's usually quicker, and it brings together people in the community instead of going to this federal body that's disconnected from what's going on locally.
Gotcha. Another question, are there any studies that show incidences of discrimination decrease after non-discrimination ordinances are implemented?
Absolutely. And ncIsready.org. I know I talked about CLT is ready and MEC is ready, but ncIsready.org has the full state and actually has whole fact sheets where you can look more on this. But we already know this, right? When we're looking at, I'm studying HR in the background too, so looking at how this affects employment has been pretty impactful too. But if you want to talk about racial disparities, for example, following Civil Rights Act and non-discrimination protections on those areas, there are still disparities, but over time those disparities have gotten less and less. And a lot of that is due to federal protections, right? It is due to people saying, hey, this company has 100 white men in these positions, but no people of color, no women. And so those gender gaps, those racial gaps are closing, at least in part due to increased legal protections that weren't there before.
Yeah, this is going to be maybe a leap of a connection, but for book club last month, we read How to Be an Anti-Racist. And one of the things that the author points out is that racism comes from racist policy, not from ignorance. And I'm wondering if that can apply to anything in regards to, other discrimination to other groups, as well. Like, are there laws that are then causing folks to hate LGBT people?
Right. I mean, and that's, when we talk about, equality and equity and start talking about these things, for a long time, the push was around diversity. And so you have one person of color, one woman, one LGBTQ person in the room, and you've achieved diversity, right? And that's what we like to call tokenism. And so when you're moving towards what these protections are really talking about is equal access, right? That part of what happens if your recruiting is only bringing up people like you, then you need to adjust your recruiting measures, right? Part of the reason that policy and systems perpetuate themselves is because if everyone in the room looks like me, then I'm going to continue to find people who look like me. If you continue to advertise in one space, if you continue to network in one space, of course you keep getting the same results. And so another thing that these protections sometimes do is encourage companies to go to places that they haven't been recruiting before, and take the time and effort to adjust their things. And even in this automated frame where your applicant tracking system does half the work for you, if you're still posting your jobs in one place, you still are gonna, bring yourself up short when it comes to diversity and equity and inclusion.
Yeah, absolutely. You have to actually be making genuine connections with folks and building community. You can't just want to hire folks and think that that's going to happen. Absolutely agree with that.
Or hire one token person and say, all right, so you're going to fix our problem for us. So
right.
Yeah.
Right. Very problematic, folks. Don't do that. It's no good. A few more questions. We have about 6 minutes left. How do you motivate people who think we don't need anti-discrimination ordinances anymore?
Absolutely, right. Part of it is pointing out that there are real aspects of discrimination, right? 1 in 3 trans people in North Carolina say they've experienced discrimination within the past year. So that's a lot of, something like 2 in 5 LGBTQ plus people in North Carolina say they've experienced discrimination in the past year. So this is real for those people. And so part of it is reminding them this is a real issue, reminding them that there are no legal protections in place for those groups of people. And then just pointing out to the impact of discrimination on our community. If you want to talk about any lens of how that will impact your community, you want to talk about an economic impact, which shouldn't be our #1 priority. So we've talked about moral, ethical issues, but the brain drain that is happening from communities of queer people, most of the people I went to school with who are queer do not live in the South anymore, right? They have left and, to find other places to go, which is often something that people tell me, why are you still, in North Carolina? And so you lose talent, you lose economic power, you get a brain drain of people who are just going to leave your community. The same thing happened before in other groups, right? Marginalized groups will flee to places where they feel safer and more welcome. And if Charlotte is trying to be this modern, competitive, global city, then it's going to need to participate as such.
Absolutely. Yeah. hates that we have to focus on like economic stuff,
Yeah.
but you know, when it comes to like, you know, if you're a business watching that's looking to, you know, hire a more diverse array of people, like I mean, I'll speak from personal experience too, you know, and I have many privileges, and so think there's folks who have to think about this even deeper. But it is also draining as an individual to apply to jobs not knowing those workplaces policies, you know, not knowing if you're going to be walking into a situation where you may have coworkers or bosses who are, you know, racist, ableist, like, you know, transphobic, all of these things. So yeah, that's heavy topic.
Absolutely, right. And even like, you know, I'm sure some people maybe when putting on an application and it has pronouns, but it doesn't have pronouns that person may use right on there, right? Like even just things like that. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, Cameron, so you mentioned, you know, folks can email the city, and I didn't catch that email address, so I'd love to put that into the comments. I've been dropping the links in the comments as well. But, you know, what's the email address? But are there other ways that folks can support the LGBT community here in Charlotte and across the state and globally?
Absolutely. I'm typing some of those up in the chat for you about ways they can contact about this issue.
Thank you.
But yeah, there are a ton of ways to get connected with the LGBTQ plus here in Charlotte and Mecklenburg County. There is the Charlotte LGBT Chamber of Commerce, which will actually give you certification of being an LGBTQ plus welcoming and affirming business. So if you're looking for a business connection, I would go to them. There's and I'll put all these links to you after the video too. The Freedom Center for Social Justice does very great intersectional work here in the community about advocating for racial justice and LGBTQ justice, and as a nonprofit, just sort of advocating on those issues, and even offers a religious lens for people who may want to engage in that space. Obviously, I do run the LGBTQ Democrats of Mecklenburg County. You're welcome to join us as well. We welcome allies and need allies, and also connect with other groups as well. If you're looking to connect on youth issues, Time Out Youth is an amazing organization that's been around for forever here. And just even, I think a few weeks ago, someone was asking me at Advent, and I was able to connect them to Time Out Youth. And they are doing amazing programs, also preventing youth homelessness and youth mental health services. So Time Out Youth, Freedom Center for Social Justice, and Charlotte LGBT Chamber are really some good places to start. And also message me, and we can talk about that all day.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you so much, Cameron. And yeah, how can folks reach you if they want to learn more about this or ask you those questions on how they can support?
Absolutely. Cameron Pruette at gmail.com. So first name, last name at Gmail, super easy.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Cameron, for giving us some information on this really important topic. I know there's tons of details, and you did an amazing job like shortening it down into that overview. So we will get this up on our YouTube channel, Advent Co-working videos, and I'll include the links that Cameron mentioned, which is the let me see, cltisready.org, mechisready.org, and ncisready.org. I love that it's like the same website name. That's like very, very useful. Right. Awesome. Well, thank you so much to everyone who's joined us today, and to everyone who's viewing this later. Advent Member Talks is a weekly event every Tuesday at 4:30 p.m. on Facebook Live. So I hope that you will join us next week. We have, I should have pulled this up, Nikki Seward with Habitual Roots is coming. So she's going to be talking about intention setting and meditation. So I hope that you'll join us then. And thank you, Cameron, and have a lovely evening.
Thank you.